The coffee was still warm in my hand when I reached the front porch. Sea air drifted in behind me, catching the edge of the floor plan folder under my arm. I tightened my grip. It was the same folder I'd carried through the inspection, the design drafts, the bank meetings. 3 levels, 3 generations, I'd said proudly when we first stood in this exact spot. Perla opened the door before I could knock. She didn't step aside. Her smile was polite, but her eyes weren't. "We actually think it's best if we use the whole space for our family," she said. Calm, practiced. My hand froze on the railing. "What?" She glanced over her shoulder. Drew was in the hallway, pretending to read something on his phone. "It's just that, with the kids in the future and us working from home, we need every room. You understand? The key I'd used just days ago no longer fit." I tried it once, twice, then looked at Drew. He didn't look up. I took a deep breath, shifted the coffee to my other hand. "Perla, this is my house. I bought it. For all of us." "I know," she said quickly, "and we're grateful. Truly. But it makes more sense if you stay somewhere quieter. There's a motel just outside town. We booked you a few nights there to settle in." A pause filled the space between us. I heard the waves behind me. A car passed down the road. Drew finally looked up and gave me the smallest nod, as if that was supposed to explain something. So I let my hand fall. I didn't argue. Didn't plead. I just turned and walked back down the steps past the flower beds I'd paid to have planted. I left the folder of plans on the porch bench. Let them decide if they'd even notice. The coffee was still warm by the time I reached my car. I set it in the cup holder, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. I had just finished packing 3 days before. Every mug, every spoon, every frame had been wrapped with care newspaper, crackling between old memories. My apartment, the one I'd rented since retiring, was stripped bare, emptied not just of things, but of purpose. I'd told everyone at the coffee shop, the post office, even the dry cleaner, that I was moving into my forever home. Not a forever home. Our forever home. When I first walked through the beach house with Perla and Drew, I saw the light in her eyes. She'd cried when she stepped into the kitchen and saw the open shelves and the marble island. "This is perfect," she whispered, clutching my arm. "It feels like home." And I believed her. I'd shown her where I planned to build a reading nook in the bay window downstairs. I told Drew I was ordering a second washer and dryer so they wouldn't have to share. Every decision was made with them in mind. I didn't want to be a burden. I wanted to be part of something again. The last night in my apartment, I sat on a folded towel and sipped coffee from a paper cup. The movers were coming at dawn. I looked around at the bare walls and felt peaceful. I was going home. Now, 2 days later, I was standing in a motel room with buzzing lights and stiff air. The motel clerk had handed me the key with a forced smile, like I was one of those women who'd lost her reservation or her husband. I opened the door and sat on the edge of the bed. The comforter was scratchy. The lamp chipped the walls an angry yellow. I placed my phone on the nightstand and waited for a message. A knock. A change of heart. Nothing came. I lay back without changing clothes and stared at the ceiling until morning. I'd trusted them to hold space for me. Now I had to figure out where I actually belonged. I used to think saying yes made me a good mother. Yes to one more bedtime story, even when I had deadlines. Yes to cleats he hadn't earned yet, because he didn't want to be the only kid in off-brand shoes. Yes to private tutoring, when his grades dipped, and yes to college out of state, even though it meant I'd be alone again. I worked nights back then, drafting commercial kitchens for restaurants I never ate in, drawing plans by hand while he slept in the next room. There were weeks I didn't see sunlight except through the window of the copy center, but I said yes, over and over. When Drew met Perla, I said yes to that too. I paid for their engagement party, then offered to help with the wedding, though they never asked. I didn't mind. That's what mothers do. And when they came to me, Voices low, eyes hopeful. Talking about IVF. I nodded. Perla said, "We don't want to ask you, but we're out of options." I didn't hesitate. I just said, "Of course." I transferred the money the next day and never brought it up again. When they said they wanted to move closer to the coast, I found the listing. When they worried about financing, I handled it. When they said, "We just want to feel safe, stable, like we can finally breathe," I wired my retirement fund without blinking. Because this house was never supposed to be mine alone. It was supposed to hold all three of us. I pictured holidays in the sunroom, birthdays on the back deck. I'd already chosen the paint for the downstairs guest room, soft gray, calming. But now, I was sleeping beside a wall-mounted air conditioner that sputtered all night, wrapped in a motel blanket that smelled like bleach and borrowed time. I'd spent a lifetime saying yes, and somehow still ended up here uninvited. And for the first time in years, I couldn't remember what no was supposed to sound like. Evelyn didn't ask questions when I called. She just told me to meet her at the diner we used to haunt during our courthouse days. I arrived early, slid into the corner booth, and ordered black coffee before she walked through the door, still sharp in her tailored blazer, even in retirement. She looked me over once, taking in the tired eyes and the motel creases on my blouse. "You want me to say it, or just skip to the part where we fix it?" I pulled the folder from my bag and laid it on the table. The same floor plans, now creased and coffee-stained, sat beside a copy of the deed and our joint draft of the living arrangement clause. I pointed to the section we had worked on years ago, just after I sold the condo. Future interest retained by grantor upon conditions unmet. Perla never understood what it meant. She just signed where Drew told her to. Evelyn adjusted her glasses. Reading slowly, then looked up. "You still own the house, Corliss. Every inch." I didn't smile. I just sipped my coffee. Good. We sat in silence for a while. The waitress refilled our cups without a word. I watched the steam rise and fall from mine. "I told you back then not to transfer the deed," Evelyn murmured. "I didn't." "I know. But I also know you weren't planning to use this." "I wasn't." She leaned back. "So what changed?" I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I said quietly, "They changed." Evelyn nodded slowly, then tapped the folder twice with her finger. "Want me to help you write up the notice?" I looked down at the blue ink crossing the page. The clause was clear. The lines were firm. "Not yet," I said. "Let's see how far their gratitude really goes." That night, back at the motel, I laid the documents out across the bed, smoothing each corner. Drew and Perla might have locked their doors, but they hadn't locked me out. Not legally, not completely. And now they were going to find that out. The call came at 6:42 a.m., just as I was pouring my second cup of coffee. I stared at Drew's name on the screen for a moment before I answered. His voice was already shaky. "Mom, hey, listen. We have a situation." I didn't say anything. Just waited. There's mold in the upstairs walls. Black mold. We didn't notice it before. "The kids are coughing. Perla's been getting headaches. We had someone out to inspect it yesterday and..." He paused, swallowed hard. "The city flagged it. Issued a stop-use order. They won't let us stay unless we get it remediated immediately." Still, I said nothing. "There's more," he added. Quieter. "The inspector asked about ownership. Said we'd need the owner's authorization for the permits. And, well, Perla and I told them we were owners. But the paperwork, it still lists you." I walked over to the window and watched the mist lifting off the motel parking lot. The asphalt shimmered in the early light. "Mom, we didn't mean to shut you out," he said softly. "That was the part that caught me. Didn't mean to." I remembered standing on that porch holding warm coffee while Perla told me to leave. I remembered the folder I'd left behind, the one with the plans for our shared home. I remembered Drew looking down at his shoes, too cowardly to speak. "Anyway," he said, rushing to fill the silence, "we were wondering if maybe you could Just send a quick note to the inspector. Grant us temporary permission to. I hung up. I opened my laptop, found the inspector's email, and typed one line. Per my retained ownership rights. I do not authorize any work on the property at this time. Then I hit send and closed the lid. They had changed the locks, drawn their lines, carved out a life without me. But walls remember everything, especially the ones you pretend don't belong to someone else. I took another sip of coffee, calm now, as the day brightened around me. The house was still mine, and they were finally starting to feel it. The box was tucked into the bottom of my suitcase, wrapped in an old cardigan that still smelled faintly of peppermint and dust. I hadn't opened it since I left the apartment. I'd told myself I'd wait until I was settled. I suppose I thought that meant somewhere with walls I trusted. It was Cedar Thomas built it for our 10th anniversary. He was always better with his hands than with words. You're the heart, he'd said once, handing it to me. I just build around it. I sat cross-legged on the motel bed and slowly lifted the lid. The blueprints were on top, folded neatly. Our first house, a tiny 2-bedroom with slanted floors and a kitchen too small to dance in, but we danced anyway. I ran my fingers over the lines, the ink faded but steady. Beneath that, Drew's baby shoes, scuffed at the toes, still loosely tied. I remembered chasing him through grocery store aisles, pretending not to laugh, as strangers smiled at the blur of a boy I could barely keep up with. And under that, a photograph. Me holding his hand at his high school graduation. His other hand was raised mid-wave, the tassel of his cap swinging in the wind. I looked proud. He looked like he knew I'd catch him if he tripped. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt the wetness on my wrist. It wasn't grief, not really. It was something more hollow than that. I'd given them everything, my savings, my trust, my future, and in return, I'd been offered a motel key and a silence so complete it made me doubt my own memories. If they didn't want me, they wouldn't get to keep the parts of me I'd wrapped in love and handed over without question. I folded the blueprint, tucked the photo beneath it, and gently closed the lid. Then I stood up, took out my phone, and called Evelyn. I didn't need comfort. I needed a printer and a deadline. The courthouse was cold in the way old buildings are, quiet, efficient, without sympathy. Evelyn was already waiting when I arrived, a folder in her hand, her glasses perched low on her nose. She didn't ask if I was sure. She knew. We sat side by side on the worn bench outside the clerk's office. The paperwork was straightforward. A revocation of occupancy under retained legal title. A formal notice. 7 days to vacate. Once this is stamped, she said, there's no undoing it quietly. I nodded. Good. The clerk called our number. 20 minutes later, it was done. Evelyn offered to serve the notice herself, but I declined. I wanted the courier's name on the delivery. No emotion, no confrontation. Just the weight of paper in an envelope sliding into their hands like gravity doing its job. Later that afternoon, Perla called me. You wouldn't dare, she snapped. This is our home now. You can't just evict your own family. I didn't respond. I let the silence sit there between us, sharp as glass. She hung up first. I drove out to the house that evening, parked across the street like a stranger. The porch light was on. A pair of children's bikes leaned against the garage untouched. I didn't go to the door. I didn't need to see them. I wasn't looking for confrontation. I was just making sure the structure still stood, that my name still lived where they had erased my presence. The curtains fluttered. Someone peeked through. I didn't move. They had changed the locks. They had closed the doors. But I had held the deed, the title, the clause they never read, and always assumed wouldn't matter. I rolled down the window just enough to feel the breeze. Then I turned the key, shifted the car into drive, and left the cul-de-sac without looking back. There were 6 days left on the notice, and I had just started planning how I'd use the 7th. On the 8th day, the house was empty. The courier confirmed the keys had been left in the mailbox envelope, sealed, no note. I waited until just before sunset to drive over, half hoping I'd find a reason to turn around. But when I pulled into the driveway, there were no signs of them. No bikes, no porch lights, no lingering footsteps in the gravel. I stood in the entryway for a long time. The air was stale, damp, with the smell of drywall and mold still lingering in the corners. But it was quiet, honest in a way it hadn't been in months. I walked through room by room. The upstairs bedrooms were untouched. My guest room, the one I'd painted in soft gray, had been converted into a storage area. I didn't open the boxes. I just made a note to have them donated if no one returned for them within the month. The mold remediation team came the next day. They worked quickly, tearing down the water-damaged drywall and airing out the infected spaces. The rot was worse than expected, not just in the walls, but behind the cabinets under the staircase. Hidden damage from years of neglect and short-sighted upgrades. It felt symbolic. I didn't renovate the whole house, just what I needed. The ground floor, a kitchen with enough space for one, a reading corner, a bedroom that finally belonged to me. The upstairs I redesigned entirely. I cleared out the rooms, stripped the carpets, and turned the largest space into a studio. Natural light poured in from the west-facing windows. I added long work tables, open shelving, and a stack of folding chairs. I put out a call to the local community center, free weekly art classes for women over 60. No experience required. Just bring yourself. Perla texted me 2 weeks later. We didn't know you'd actually go through with it. I stared at the screen for a moment before replying, that makes 2 of us. Then I set the phone down, unlocked the front door, and waited for my first student to arrive. The nursery had once been painted soft yellow. I'd picked the color before Drew was born, convinced it would make the room feel like sunlight, even in winter. I hadn't stepped inside since they left. The crib was long gone, but the space still held a kind of quiet expectation, like it was waiting to be useful again. I cleared it out over a weekend. Boxed what was salvageable, swept the floor, patched the nail holes. I didn't redecorate it for family. I made it warm, but neutral. A new twin bed clean, linens, a second-hand dresser, a reading lamp. I stocked the closet with towels, extra blankets, a pair of slippers no one had worn yet. It wasn't for Drew. I opened the door to others. A friend of Evelyn's daughter visiting from Vermont for a medical conference. A traveling nurse in between contracts. A retired librarian who needed a place to stay while waiting for her apartment's plumbing to be repaired. They all came through that room, and none of them treated it like theirs. They left thank you notes on the pillow, washed the mugs they used. One woman brought me wildflowers wrapped in a scarf. I started hosting small coffee mornings on the first Sunday of every month. No invitations, just word of mouth. Whoever came, came. We sat around the long table upstairs, once a nursery, now a space full of women with stories to tell. There was no gossip, no judgment, no one measuring what I owed or didn't. We talked about books and broken things we fixed ourselves. We passed around old recipes and new names. Nobody called me a burden, not once. The house for the first time felt like it had expanded instead of shrunk. And one afternoon after everyone had left, I walked into that guest room and opened the window wide. The air smelled like strong coffee and dried paint. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the quiet. Then I turned to the studio and began setting out brushes for the next class. The letter arrived in late spring, tucked among the circulars and utility bills. The handwriting on the envelope was familiar. Drew's unmistakably his. Slanted, careful, like he always wrote when he didn't know what tone to strike. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on the kitchen counter for 2 days next to the fruit bowl and the chipped mug I used for pens. When I finally slit the envelope open, it was only a single page. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask to come back. He wrote that he was sorry, that they were staying with friends while they figured things out. that the children missed the house and that Perla had started looking for work again. He didn't say he regretted what happened, only that he understood it now. I read it twice. Then I folded the letter neatly and slid it into the drawer beneath the coffee filters. Not to save it, just to place it somewhere I wouldn't see too often. That afternoon, I walked down the hall to the studio and pulled out an old wooden plaque I'd found at a thrift shop weeks ago. I painted over it in soft white, then wrote the words with a steady hand. No entry without gratitude. I nailed it above the studio door. That evening, I brewed a fresh cup and carried it out to the back deck. The ocean stretched wide and patient before me, the waves moving like they had somewhere to be, but weren't in a rush to get there. I sat in the same chair where I'd once imagined Drew playing with his future children. Imagined myself serving lemonade and telling stories about his childhood. That version of the future didn't happen, but the one I had now was still quiet, still mine. I took a slow sip of coffee and let the wind pull through my sleeves. I didn't need the door to be open for them anymore. I only needed to know that this time it was me who chose whether or not to answer the knock.